Malole soifua. This is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Lydia Lewis in for Susana Suisuiki. Coming up, China's set to reel in $22 billion from the world's poorest nations.
In Tonga, it's been a big political issue this year, debt repayments to China.
Also, the first Chamoru woman navigator in living memory is at the helm of a traditional canoe.
Really late at night, it feels sometimes that we're not sailing in the ocean, but sailing in a sea of stars.
And Talofa Lava. It's Samoan Language Week here in Aotearoa.
A stellar service.
Dengue fever outbreaks are not slowing down in the Pacific just yet, but there are hopes this will change as the weather gets cooler and drier. Samoa's had a massive jump in cases and the number of people getting infected in other countries continues to creep upwards. Caleb Fotheringham has more.
Samoa's Director General of Health, Aotearoa Dr. Alec Ikoromo, says last week there were 56 new cases, which is about a third of the total since January. Aotearoa says the Health Ministry is encouraging people to stamp out breeding grounds, which is preferred over spraying campaigns.
The chemical is expensive and it's not as effective as we would like it to be. So it's better actually that we engage the community to destroy breeding sites.
He says healthcare staff are managing.
The good thing is that there's been sort of no very sick cases really recently. So in fact, looking at the data, there's no one in the hospital right now.
Fiji Medical Association President Dr. Alepate Vakamore thinks Fiji is about to hit its dengue peak.
It's seasonal, so it should be on its way down. And we've seen the numbers from the Central Division start to come down. It's just the numbers in the Western Division haven't really started to settle yet. But we should see that now that we're entering into the cold season.
Fiji's health ministry has declared an outbreak in the Central and Western divisions. There have been more than 1,000 cases and 2 deaths.
We've noticed that the outbreak is particularly higher in the Western Division compared to the Central Division. And we've had quite a few admissions into hospital with dengue and even quite a few into ICUs with the complications of dengue.
Dr. Vakamore says doctors are coping with a high number of patients with dengue symptoms. He says there have also been significant public health campaigns to clean up and reduce the number of mosquito breeding sites.
We've had some challenges which we've raised in the past with a couple of our consumables like our IV fluids and things like that, but they're managing at the moment. I think there are other donor partners who've stepped in to help the ministry bolster its clinical support.
An outbreak has been declared in the Cook Islands where there has been 17 cases, all on Rarotonga. Tonga has also been grappling with the outbreak since February, recording 815 cases.
The world's poorest and most vulnerable countries are set to make record high debt repayments to China. New research from the Lowy Institute shows China is set to call in $22 billion for debts from 75 countries, assessed by the World Bank as the world's poorest and most vulnerable in 2025. 10 Pacific nations are on the list, including Tonga, Samoa, Vanuatu and the Solomon Islands. Lowy Institute research fellow Riley Duke told Te Wila Fuatai his research examines China's shift from lead bilateral banker to chief debt collector to the developing world.
So because of the large amount of lending that China did in the mid-2010s and the way it structured its loans through its Belt and Road Initiative, this year it is seeing a huge spike in repayments. Now, for the Pacific countries that have borrowed from China, many of them are currently already dealing with the repayment strain. We see in particular in Tonga, it's been a big political issue this year, debt repayments to China, and there are rising and quite high levels of payments also in Samoa and Vanuatu.
So you've mentioned Tonga, Samoa and Vanuatu. What are the key considerations in making those repayments going forward?
Well, I think the issue being faced, I think particularly in Tonga, as we're seeing it in the current debate in that country, but in other parts of the Pacific as well, is about the trade-offs. So they face very high repayments, but there are many other priorities for both the people and the government governments in the Pacific, in dealing with these challenges. So, as an example, last year Tonga spent more on its debt repayments than it did on health for its citizens. And so when we look at the sort of forward outlook, there are more challenges on the horizon. There are key development issues, across the Pacific that countries and their governments and their people want to be dealing with. But instead, these debt burdens are there and they're persistent. So the challenge is managing the debt burdens, repaying them, but then also seeing if there's room for debt cancellations or restructurings, in times of crisis, and really just trying to manage the trade-off between short-term debt repayments and longer-term development priorities.
So what does that look like practically for somewhere like Tonga or any of these Pacific nations that are making these huge repayments but don't have the income?
So, if we take Tonga as an example, for the next few years, about 15% of the government's revenues will be devoted to debt repayments. But it's important for countries reputationally that they pay off their debt. And I think across the Pacific, most Pacific countries are rated at high risk of debt distress. But that isn't tipping over into very unsustainable territory yet. But the problem is about how much of a buffer these countries have in their financing, how much money they have sitting around to deal with potentially another crisis, another natural disaster, these kind of issues. Again, just to focus on Tonga because it's been such a big topic in that country this year. Tonga ran 5 successful budget surpluses, in the lead up to having a big wave of Chinese debt repayments coming in. But then it faced huge economic costs from the pandemic, from the earthquake, from cyclones, and so that wiped out all of the money that they had put aside and has really removed that buffer, that sort of safety zone and their own safety net on their financing. In terms of the solutions, it's very complicated because it's very country-to-country basis and really loan-to-loan basis. But for the Pacific, other partners to the region are showing a strong willingness to step in, provide additional support. And we've seen Australia, as an example, providing more budget support to Pacific countries. It's provided it in Tonga, amongst other places. And so the question is about balancing partners, balancing sources of funding, and I guess trying to receive funding from more diverse and stable sources. And then really also just trying to focus on stable revenues, getting money in the door to drive growth and pay off debt repayments with a sort of a more longer term view and not really focusing on short term issues.
You mentioned that phrase stable and diversifying where to get revenue or lending. Is China not considered a stable partner or source of lending?
That's a very good question. So, China's main form of engagement with the Pacific 15 years ago was lending. I think 80% of all of China's development financing into the region was in the form of loans. And that's fallen off dramatically, since around 2018. I think part of that was a reputational hit. So Pacific countries started to have concerns about the quality of some of the Chinese projects. And then part of it was also competition. So in 2010, China might have been the only partner offering large-scale infrastructure financing. Australia is now offering more financing in that space. The World Bank is offering more financing in that space. There's climate funds that are also offering adaptation projects and adaptation infrastructure. So there is more options on the table for Pacific countries than there was previously. And I think that is part of the reason that China's lending has declined. I think it's less than a quarter of the level it was in the mid-2010s.
A traditional canoe voyage, once lost to time, is now making waves between Guam and Saipan. At the helm, a Chamoru woman navigator, the first in living memory. Our Guam correspondent Naina Rao brings us the story of cultural revival, resilience and a journey guided by stars, memory and deep ancestral knowledge.
On open ocean between Guam and Saipan, a traditional Micronesian canoe named Ilaul slices through the waves. No GPS, just stars, memory, and tradition. At the helm is Melissa Titano, the first Chamoru woman to lead such a voyage in living memory. This journey spanned more than 240 kilometers and marks the first traditional Micronesian canoe voyage between these islands in decades. Once a vital route connecting Micronesian communities, Ms. Titano says it had all but disappeared.
seafaring was very vibrant within the Marianas, before colonialism, before the Spanish Empire, right, came into the picture.
That history traces back to the 16th century. But
I think that contemporary times encourage us to forget that.
In recent years, efforts to revive canoe building and traditional navigation have gained momentum. In the Federated States of Micronesia, navigators are once again teaching how to read stars, swells, and birds. And at the University of Guam, Master Navigator Larry Regatal has been offering a traditional seafaring course since 2017.
So to me, there's a lot to learn from canoe culture and sailing and learning about the ocean.
Mr. Regatal and his crew had just returned from Saipan, sailing Ilau alongside Miss Taitno. The voyage also underscores the canoe's environmental value.
We haven't burned any petrol since we came out this distance. You know how much that would cost nowadays in fuel? A lot. For us to go to Saipan and come back, we spent not even 1 penny. United will charge you a good cost on that. We are not rich people, we are poor people, but we use and harness the energy provided to us by surrounding environment, right?
But this wasn't just about revival. It was a first of another kind. The first time a Chamorro woman has sailed this sacred sea lane as a pairoro, an ordained traditional navigator in modern history.
Really late at night, it feels sometimes that we're not sailing in the ocean, but sailing in a sea of stars. It's really a kind of very spiritual and fantastic, magical experience.
Miss Taitno's journey began in 2017 when she took Mr. Regatal's class. She learned to carve a canoe, to sail, and how to use chisels and gouges. Historically, those roles were held by men, passed from master to apprentice.
And traditionally, women are of the land and men are of the sea. Women are seen as too valuable to lose out at sea. They're seen as necessary.
When asked how she feels being a woman in a male-dominated space, Ms. Taitno often says she's not just a woman, she's a navigator. But the reality, she admits, is more complex.
That it's been a process, right? We've had to negotiate, it's different for the canoe guys in the canoe house that have been in the canoe house all their lives carving, and their sisters, and mothers, that they never had to share a space with a woman. But then here's this, woman not even of their own, they're not, I'm not Carolinian, right? And I don't even speak their language.
The canoe she sailed is rooted in Carolinian tradition, different from her own Chamorro heritage, that made her presence in the canoe house even more unusual.
And then all of a sudden, right, I'm carving alongside them, and where is my place? Do I sit with the guys who are doing the carving, or do I sit with the pairoros and the old folks that are, and making decisions? So I think that they had to learn to pull back from that and to let me, do things like bail and to trust me to lash things, right? So that I'm not just sitting on the canoe, but I'm actually working the canoe.
Mr. Regatal says some of the best navigators are women because
they hold the knowledge. They just don't sail, but they're keepers of the knowledge.
So if anything happens to the men at sea, women are ready to step in. When Ilau landed in Saipan, it was 3 a.m. The crew did not record tape, but by the next day, crowds gathered to welcome the delegation for the Flame Tree Festival, an annual celebration of Chamorro, Carolinian, and broader Micronesian culture. For Ms. Taitno, the journey is just the beginning.
I think contemporary times only allows this notion that we're really separate, when in fact we have thousands of years. We have common ties, a common history, a common identity, and seafaring is a way that we can rally together. And I just, this is just about the young folks, and we want to be able to give them every opportunity to experience that, and certainly, whatever small efforts that we do, we hope, we're just planting seeds, and we're just hoping that, the next generation can kind of, continue watering and, those seeds and planting seeds of their own.
One of those seeds may be Annie Faye Camacho. She's a Micronesian studies student at the University of Guam and a current student of Mr. Regatal's seafaring class.
I think the beautiful things happen when you merge modern and traditional. For people on the islands, I think it's a thing to be proud about, like having something so unique to a region that is so wonderful and powerful that you could say that this is your own, and say that it's been around for so many hundreds of years and it's worked and it's proven.
Both Miss Camacho and Miss Taitano believe the stars may guide the voyage, but it's the next generation that'll carry it forward.
That canoe is not just a floating piece of wood. It really represents identity. It represents resilience. It's culture. It's you.
For the past decade, high school students have celebrated Samoan Language Week by showcasing their language skills at church. One service here in Auckland, New Zealand saw 15 schools, 300 students and more than 50 parents, teachers and supporters gathered at Papatoetoe High on Sunday for the annual Samoan Language Week service. Lemoa Henry Fesuluai says that having ceremonies like this where students are at the centre and in control plays a huge part in their personal and academic growth. As Grace Fiava'ai reports, it's a celebration for all, both Samoan and non-Samoan.
This year's theme is Ia Malulosa for Lau Ilangi Ma, which means a well-grounded self is a successful self. Papatoetoe High School's Samoan language teacher and dean, Timo Morisa, says the event has been stellar.
It was a stellar one, a stellar service yesterday. It was really, really awesome. It felt like I was in a White Sunday service, just put it that way. And if you think about when our Samoa communities celebrate White Sunday, you've got the decorations, you've got the amazing performances.
He also says it's bigger than just a service and has a lot of teaching points for the students.
So it's bigger than just the service. I feel it's bigger than just the importance of the service and the opening. But there are so many defining teaching points that we are handing over to the students that are coming in.
Fotua Mālama Secretary Lemoa Henry Fesuluai is also a committee member involved in planning themes for Samoan Language Week. He says this year's theme is based on the strengths of an individual.
And it was an interpretation, not a translation, around the theme, around the concept of someone that is well grounded in their language and their culture and their beliefs that can really support them to be successful in the future.
Lemoa says language growth must not end at school. He encourages community members to speak Ngangana Samoa at home too.
We shouldn't, as parents, not rely only on schools and only on the secondary school system or whichever education system, because those are very limited times. But most of the time, your children are right in front of you. That's the most important thing, that you're normalizing being Samoan in the home. So when they do leave the home, there's other accessibility and support.
Teacher Mr. Morisa says one of the highlights of the event was when Tawanu Berenice Tapu spoke.
One of the chiefs of Ngangana Samoa in New Zealand, Mr. Tawanu Tapu from Macaulay last night, stood up in a very emotional speech, and he said, in 10 years, in 20 years, in 50 years, where will our language and our culture be? And it is our responsibility.
Papatoetoe High School has been hosting the event for 5 years. It's their last year before handing the baton on.
And that is Pacific Waves for today. For all episodes, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, happy Samoan Language Week. Tofa soifua.